All right, I think we can go ahead and get started, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the Tourette Association of America for Getting It Together, a Neurodivergent Teens Guide to Harnessing Executive Function. This webinar is designed with teens with Tourette Syndrome in mind. My name is Haley Carlton, and I am the Youth and Young Adult Programs Coordinator here at the Tourette Association of America. I will be putting some resources in the chat section of the webinar, including our teen guide, and these resources are also available in hard copies by reaching out to support@tourette.org, which I will also provide in the chat shortly. One more thing I want to announce also that applications for our Youth Ambassador Program are now live and will be open until September 23rd. The Youth Ambassador Program is an opportunity for teens to come together, learn more about Tourette syndrome, and educate their local communities via community presentations. I will put my email in the chat shortly. If you have any questions, you can send me an email. I would now like to introduce you all to our presenters for tonight's webinar, Chase Hevesy and Dr. Katrina Hermitet. Chase Hevesy, a rising high school junior, has been a TAA Youth Ambassador since March of 2023. On last year's National Advocacy Day, Chase spoke to the Congressional Tourette Syndrome Caucus about dealing with tics and overcoming the numerous challenges posed by Tourette syndrome. Since then, she has provided community presentations to elementary schools in her area and presented TAA webinars about self-advocacy and obtaining school accommodations. She's passionate about helping younger kids and teens with Tourette syndrome cope with their symptoms and find a welcoming community. Dr. Katrina Hermitet, pediatric psychologist, proudly joins the Tourette Association as a vice president of medical and scientific affairs. Dr. Hermitet has worked closely with the TAA during her tenure at Akron Children's Hospital in Akron, Ohio, in which she was the clinical director of the Tic and Tourette Service, a TAA Center of Excellence, and as a member of the TAA Medical Advisory Board. In addition to leading both the Tic and Tourette Service and the School Success Clinic, an interdisciplinary service for dyslexia and learning disorders, she was most recently the division chief of neurobehavioral health and a director of the Pediatric Psychology Fellowship. We will take questions at the end of the presentations. Feel free to put questions in the questions and answer section on your panel at any time during the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to ask you to complete a survey via a QR code. We're funded by the CDC to bring programs like this one to you. So please take the time to fill out the short survey at the end of this program, as your input is valuable for future programming. Thank you, and I will hand it off to Chase. Chase, you can begin sharing your screen.
All right, hello everybody. Let me just get these slides up here on the Zoom. All right, so you guys already know the title of this presentation. We're going to talk about Getting It Together, a Neurodivergent Teen's Guide to Executive Function. Oh, there we go. I know Haley just gave me that wonderful introduction, and I thank her for that. So I just want to tell you guys a little bit more about me. I'm about to go into my junior year of high school. Like Haley said, I'm a youth ambassador, and it is a wonderful program. If you're of age to be a youth ambassador or a rising leader, I highly suggest you apply. It is such a wonderful experience getting to meet other teens with Tourette syndrome and getting to advocate for yourself in DC. So I highly recommend it. I'm also a student journalist. I'm part of my school's Model Congress team, and I'm a big chemistry enthusiast, so that's just a little bit more about me. And then on the Tourette syndrome side, I've had TS since I was 6 years old. I also have OCD, anxiety, and a hearing impairment. So that's a bit about me. So let's get into it. All right. These slides are moving slowly, but there we go. So up on the board, I've got a bunch of phrases, and I want you to think to yourself if they sound familiar. So I'm going to read them out loud for you guys. Here we go. You're so lazy. You're wasting time. You're such a mess. Apply yourself more. Why is this so hard for you? You can't do anything right. This next one really hurts. You have more potential than this. And then finally, the one in the center, my favorite, get it together. Now, do these phrases sound familiar, or at least some of them? These might have been things that your parents have told you, your teachers have told you. These might even have been some things that you repeat to yourself in your head. Kids and teens with Tourette syndrome are often told that they're struggling academically or they're not achieving their goals. This is a chronic problem within the Tourette syndrome community, but it all has one key underlying factor, and that is, drumroll please, executive function. So obviously this whole presentation is about executive function, and we're going to get into it a lot more deeply in just a minute, but I want to give you guys a quick overview first about what executive function really is and how you should think about it. I like to think of it as a CEO for your brain. So I've got a picture of a CEO looking guy up on the slide, if that's kind of cute. But when you think about it, a CEO, they run a company, right? They manage the employees, manage the supply chain, make sure everything is running smoothly, make sure that things are running efficiently. They make sure that all the goals are being achieved. A CEO is in charge and they're making sure everything is running smoothly. That's how a CEO runs a company. Executive function is like having a CEO for your brain, something to manage your life, to get your goals together, and to do what you have to do. So when people struggle with the executive function, they often struggle to do the things that they want and to meet the goals that they have. So that's why it's so important, especially in the Tourette syndrome community, to talk about executive function and to make sure we're informed about it. So now that we have a little bit of that background on executive function, I just want to run through a quick agenda of what we're going to be going over today. So I want to delve a little deeper into the question, what exactly is executive function? We're going to go a little deeper into that. Then I want to talk about how executive function works in the brain. It is the CEO of your brain, so we got to understand a little bit about the brain itself. The third question, why do people with Tourette syndrome struggle with executive function? There's a lot of reasons that you might not even have been aware of before. And then finally, the big ticket question, how can I improve my executive function? And we're going to spend the majority of our time today on that fourth question, and we're going to address 3 exact fields of executive function. Let's get into a little bit of executive function 101. So let's define it. If you Google executive function right now, if you go on Google or Bing or whatever, and you Google what executive function is, you're going to get a variety of definitions. There's not one set definition. So what I've done, I've taken like all the definitions I found online and kind of mashed them into one. So the definition I'm going to give you is that executive function is a set of cognitive skills that help us learn, work, and manage our daily lives. A lot of things require executive functioning skills, like doing your homework or planning a project, think a research paper or a presentation. But some things also involve executive function that you might not expect, like playing video games or getting up in the morning. We'll discuss more about why that is later on. And another thing that's important to know is that executive function is an umbrella term. It's not one specific factor. No one just has good executive function all around. It's a set of many skills and categories, like all of these. On the left here, you can see we've got 3 executive function skills: working memory, time management, and organization. Now, these are the key 3 that we're really going to be going into depth with later on once we have more of that foundation about executive function. So we're going to be going into a lot of depth with these 3. But I want you guys to know that there's other kinds of executive function skills as well, like mental flexibility, emotional regulation, so being able to manage how you feel, starting tasks, prioritizing, which we're actually going to be touching on a little bit, paying attention, and there's even more that aren't listed on this slide. But we're mainly going to be delving into these 3 because they are foundational skills that will help you build a lot of the other skills too. So now that we kind of understand more about what executive function is, let's learn about its home, and that is the brain. I want to start with this fact because it always puts into perspective how powerful your brain really is. Your brain is about 2% of your body weight. So if you've got someone who's 100 pounds, their brain's probably going to be around 2 pounds. That being said, all the calories that you take in, all the energy that you take in through food, about 20 to 30% of those calories go to your brain. So for something that's 1/50th of your body weight, it's taking almost 1/3 of your energy. That goes to show that the brain carries out a lot of important functions and does a lot for you as you live your day-to-day life. If we zoom in on the microscopic level in the brain, we can find neurons. Neurons are cells, and they are the building blocks of the brain. If you ever take AP psychology like me and put yourself through that hell, you will have to learn a lot more about the structure of a neuron. But all you need to know for right now is that it looks like this. These arms right here, if you can see my mouse, are called dendrites, and they listen to other neurons. And then here in the center is our cell body. That's like the center point of the neuron. And down here at the end, we've got our axons, which speak to other neurons through chemical messages. There's 85 billion total neurons in the brain, so that's a lot. All these neurons are talking to each other and communicating with each other through chemical messages. And these neurons form the lobes and hemispheres of the brain. So if we zoom back out again and look at the whole brain, we get something that looks kind of like this. So I want to give you guys a bit of context about the brain itself. I want you to take both your fists, just like this, and put them together. This is about the size of your brain. It's a little bit bigger than this, but this is about the size of your brain, and each fist is like a hemisphere. Your brain has two hemispheres, one on the left and one on the right. Each hemisphere has 4 lobes. A lobe is a specialized area that carries out specific functions within your brain. So I'm going to go over this diagram real quick, just so we've got that understanding of exactly how the brain works. This yellow lobe right here, this is called the temporal lobe. It deals with a lot of things like emotions and processing auditory information, so the things that you hear. This green lobe in the back is the occipital lobe, right in the back of your head, and it processes visual information. If you've ever heard the expression, you know, I've got eyes at the back of my head, well, it's kind of true. The top lobe up here, that's called the parietal lobe, and it deals with mainly sensory integration, so making sense of the environment around you and what you're sensing. These two structures at the bottom of the brain are not lobes, but they're also important. The cerebellum is for balance and coordination. The brainstem is mainly for the functions that keep you alive that you're not aware of, like your heartbeat or your breathing. You might have noticed that I purposefully left one part of this diagram out, and that would be the orange part up here, the frontal lobe. That's because the frontal lobe is the main thing we're going to be focusing on today when we're talking about executive function. Frontal lobe takes care of many important things, such as thinking and cognition, remembering things, your behavior, and the way that you move. So specifically, there's an area within the frontal lobe that really deals with a lot of executive function skills. It's like the locus of those executive function skills, and that's called the prefrontal cortex. So if you can see the diagram right here, that's the part in blue, and it's right behind your forehead. And what it does is that it helps you interact with and manipulate the environment. So take what's around you and manipulate it to get the result that you want. It also helps us to regulate our actions and emotions. I'm going to share a fact with you that I think might be comforting about the brain. The frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex are part of something called the neocortex. And those are the newest structures of the brain, evolutionarily speaking. So they're the oldest humans, like billions of years ago. They only had like the back functions of their brain, and they weren't that advanced. And over time, I'm talking billions and millions of years, more structures built onto the brain. And the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe, those were some of the last structures to develop. They're also some of the last parts of the brain to mature within the human lifespan. So if you're maybe a younger teen, or even if you're not a younger teen, take heart in knowing that maybe your frontal lobe and your prefrontal cortex just aren't fully developed yet.
Chase, when I'm teaching about the brain, something that I love to share is like, so say you forgot your homework. What part of your head are you hitting if you forgot your homework? So if you're sitting in your class, yeah. So you're hitting your frontal lobe, right? And often it's your frontal lobe that fails you, right? So if you're listening to this presentation thinking, oh my gosh, where did Chase say executive functioning lives? Think of the place where you slap your head, where you lose your keys, or you forget your homework.
That's such a good way to remember it. I love that.
Yeah, you aren't hitting your occipital lobe when you forget your homework. It's right here. Yep.
Nope. That's amazing. Love that. That's a good way to remember it, guys. All right, so now that we know more about the brain and how it works, let's address our third question that we went over in the agenda, and that is, why do people with Tourette syndrome often struggle with executive function? So there's many reasons. Someone could experience all 4 of these reasons, maybe just one, could be any combination. So I'm going to start with this one up here on the top left. Most people with Tourette syndrome have some kind of comorbid condition. I think it's like 5 and 6. I don't know the exact figure. I think it's around that. But that means that people with Tourette syndrome often have other things like ADHD, anxiety, OCD. These conditions can make executive function very difficult on their own. ADHD often involves problems in attention and memory, so impulsivity as well. Those can pose many executive function challenges. Anxiety and OCD, very hard to, manage your goals or your time when you've got worrying thoughts running around in your head. So a comorbid condition can be incredibly detrimental to somebody's executive function. There's also down here medication side effects. A lot of people with Tourette syndrome will take medication for their tics or for their comorbid conditions. And depending on the medication that they're taking and the way it reacts in their body, That could cause challenges like maybe sleepiness or excess hunger that might make it hard to pay attention in class or set goals. Down here, we've got brain differences in the frontal lobes or the basal ganglia that we might not even fully know about yet. People with Tourette syndrome obviously have different brains than neurotypical individuals. These differences might cause challenges in executive function even more. And then finally, up here at the top right, I think is the biggest reason. It can be very difficult to manage your life when you've got tics all the time. Tics are distracting, they take up energy, they take up space in our lives. That means executive function is much harder for someone with TS than it is for somebody without TS. So when you take all these reasons and you combine them, it's clear to see executive function is a clear point of struggle for those with Tourette syndrome. So I just said all that, and you guys might be thinking, oh man, I'm screwed. I'm never going to be good at executive function. I'm never going to get my grades up. I'm never going to accomplish my goals. You might be in a puddle of tears. Don't be. Executive functioning skills are absolutely not fixed. They can be taught and improved upon. I'm sure many of you have heard before that the brain is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more it'll grow. And that's true. In psychology and neurology, there's a concept called neuroplasticity. And that means that the brain can physically and chemically change and adapt through experience. So if you practice your executive functioning skills that we're going to go over, if you try actively to improve upon them, your brain will start to get used to it and it won't be as hard. So if you're discouraged right now, don't be. With practice, with time, and by learning the proper methods to improve your executive functioning skills, you can absolutely change those habits. All right, so we're going to get into our first skill that we're going over. I said we're going over 3. So this is skill number 1, and that is organization, mainly organization of the physical space. Oh goodness, look at all these pictures up here. We've got a messy bedroom, a messy drawer, a messy desk, and a messy backpack. And I'm sure many of us have experienced these kinds of situations in our lives. I know that, my desk isn't always clear of stuff on it. And sometimes I have stuff on the floor in my bedroom, right? But when we struggle with executive function, that can mean we've got really challenging situations in terms of physical organization. It's like tackling a beast. And when you've got an entire room or an entire desk that's completely cluttered, it can be very difficult to start organizing. That's where we get to the power of starting small. If you try to take on everything at once, especially when it comes to organizing your space, it can be very overwhelming. You might look at it and be like, oh my God, how am I going to get all this stuff cleaned up? And you might just quit, right? And I totally understand that. So if you start with small goals, you reduce the chance that it's going to be overwhelming. It helps you gain confidence, like stepping stones, and slowly work towards bigger goals. So when you want to get started organizing, here's how I want you to do it. I want you to pick somewhere, anywhere really that you want to organize. It can be your desk, your drawer, backpack, locker, wherever it might be, right? And start with a very simple task. I mean, stupidly simple. Like something that you're like, oh my God, that is so easy and quick. Like that is very simple. Yes, I want you to start with something like that. Like remove trash from the front pocket of your backpack or sharpen some of the loose pencils in your drawer, right? These are small steps that you can do to get started organizing. And over time, you will build confidence, you'll build stamina, and then before you know it, you'll have cleaned your whole space. So once you've gotten started with those smaller goals and tasks, I recommend that you use systems in order to stay organized. So a system is really just a mechanism of moving parts that'll help you get organized in your daily life. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be some big thing. It's just something that's going to make organization easier for you. So like we did before, start with one area, backpack, locker, desk, drawer, whatever it may be. Start with one area and find a way to use a system in that area. So here are just some suggestions that I have. If you're trying to organize your backpack, you can designate specific pockets for specific items. Like maybe the front pocket is just for pens and pencils. Maybe the side pocket is just for your chargers, whatever it might be. Having a system in your backpack can help you make sure you can find things. If you're trying to organize your locker, you can use a divider. This will give you more space, and you can maybe say that, the top part of the divider is for books and the bottom part is for binders. That's going to help you keep your locker organized. Let's see what else. Putting homework in a special homework folder. I highly recommend this. A lot of people, they don't get their homework turned in on time, not because they forgot to do it, but because they lost their homework or it got stuck at the bottom of the backpack or whatever it might be. So if you put a homework in a special folder, that's a very easy system that's going to help you find it when you need it. You can make checklists of what you need. So in the morning, you can write a checklist of what you need to put in your bag or have on your desk, whatever it may be. And you might think that at the beginning, these systems feel a little bit unnatural. When you're starting, it could feel like you're kind of forcing it or you're not used to it. And that's completely normal. But over time, as you use the systems and as you practice, they will become effortless. It will become a habit and it'll just become part of your organization.
One of the easiest ways for your brain to sort and kind of system up, like you said, Chase, is to do something called the pre-MAC principle. So the pre-MAC principle was built by psychologists. These pre-MAC principle psychologists are probably bazillionaires that retired in Miami. But all they did is they demonstrated that we like to do preferred things before we like to do unpreferred things. So if I take two things like doing my homework, right, or playing video games, a lot of times our brain wants to play video games first and do homework second. But what science actually tells us is that you're actually not even enjoying video games because all you're doing is ruminating and worrying about doing homework later. And so something very simply you can do is stack it the opposite way. Do the thing that you don't want to do and reward yourself with the thing that you do want to do. So again, just a really simple task that almost sounds overly simple, that's kind of against the way that our brain works, that'll help you start to system up, like Chase said.
Thank you, Dr. Hermitet, for including that. I remember the pre-MAC principle from AP Psych, so you just brought back some memories for me. But yes, that can be a great system to use that will help you get organized. All right, I'm going to focus in on a specific kind of system now that I really like. I think this can be really helpful, especially for those of us who are visual learners. I'm definitely a visual learner, and that is to categorize things and labels. Making categories can help you find what you need and be a lot more efficient when you're trying to get organized. One of my favorite ways to do this is to color code. You can assign a specific color for each class that you have. Like maybe all your blue school supplies are for math, maybe all your red school supplies are for English, all your green are for science, etc., etc. And you can do whatever you want. But color coding is going to help you, keep things more efficient and find what you need. You can assign a drawer in your dresser for specific clothing. You can label bins for different kinds of items. Just take a piece of painter's tape and a Sharpie and write the name out. It doesn't have to be some big complicated thing, like I said, but categorizing and labeling is an incredible way to make efficient systems that will help you get organized and stay organized. So before we move on to the next skill, I want to leave you guys with a little bit of information about why this is so important, about why organization is such an important skill, especially in the realm of executive function. When you have a disorganized space, it's going to lead to you having a more disorganized mind. When you walk into your room, maybe your room is where you do your homework and your schoolwork. If you walk in there and it's a mess, it's going to be harder to get your mind in an organized space where you can do your homework or set your goals properly, right? When you have an organized space, it means you have less clutter and less stress. It makes it easier to start tasks and do what you need to do when your space isn't as messy. Additionally, things might take you less time because you'll know where they are. The things that you need will be much more accessible. And the thing about organization, in my opinion, is that it's one of the most foundational executive function skills. If you think of a building, and it's got a foundation before all the other floors, organization is like the base of the building that keeps everything else standing up. It's incredibly important. If you can get this skill down, you can get the other executive function skills down too. So without further ado, let's move on to the second main executive function skill, and that is time management and planning. In essence, the concept of time management and planning is a lot like the concept of organization, but instead of organizing your physical space, you're organizing your time and you're planning out what you want to do with the 24 hours that you have in a day. So time management and planning will help you achieve what you want to achieve and use your time the most efficiently. So when you're trying to manage your time, it all begins with setting goals. So the way I like to think about goals is with the SMART framework. You might have heard this acronym in school, so if you already know it, I apologize, but I'm going to go over it again for those of you who might not know the SMART framework. So when you're setting a SMART goal, you've got to hit all these 5 targets. And the first one, S, is specific. Goals should be specific. They shouldn't be vague. Let's say I have a goal to read. Okay, what am I reading? How long am I going to be reading it for? How many pages am I going to be reading? How many chapters am I going to be reading? When am I going to read this book? So if you've got a more specific goal, it's going to be much easier to achieve because you've outlined exactly what you want to do. The second part of our SMART framework is the M, and that stands for measurable. So a measurable goal means you can track your progress and reevaluate how you're doing along the way. So if I have a goal to read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, that's definitely more specific than my first goal to just read, but I can't really measure that well. Am I going to read the entire book in one sitting? Am I going to read one chapter? Am I going to read a couple of pages, right? So if you've got a standard where you can measure your goal, that can make it much easier to set out and achieve that goal. The third part of the SMART framework is the A, and that's for attainable. Attainable basically just means it's realistic. If I had a goal to become the next Taylor Swift, to become a great pop star, that's cool, but it's not the most realistic thing in the world. A more realistic goal would be to improve my singing skills. So that's an example of applying the attainable part of the SMART framework. The next part means that it's relevant, and a relevant goal means that it matters in your life and for what you want to do. So for example, I enjoy engineering, right? That's the field I want to go into. So for me, a relevant goal would be improving my math skills or my physics knowledge. So that would be a goal that's relevant for an interest like that. And then the final part of the SMART framework, and this one is incredibly important, and that's that a goal is time bound. It's incredibly helpful to have deadlines so you can monitor your progress. If I have a goal where I just want to read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, I'll go back to that one. When do I want to be done with that by? If I have that standard, I can hold myself accountable. If I want to be done in a month, that's going to help me set goals every day that will help me reach that eventual goal of being done in a month. So all these parts of the SMART framework, if you put them together, you're going to make extremely achievable, realistic, and specific goals, and you'll get a lot more done than you thought you would.
If we take that and we apply that to something that many of you might be familiar with called cognitive behavioral therapy, we think about the 3 aspects of what it means to be human, right? So thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And what science teaches us is the behavior is actually the easiest thing to change. So often when we're setting a goal or trying to change something, if we wait until we feel that we're ready, we might be waiting forever, because emotion is actually the hardest thing to change, and feeling is an emotion. So sometimes when you're setting a goal, there is true science in faking it till you make it, that we engage in behaviors and then our thoughts and feelings kind of come along after we realize that those behaviors are not scary. And that's how you really kind of cognitively think about goal attainment.
Exactly. Thank you for including that. If you change your behaviors, it will also change your thoughts and your feelings. So that's definitely an important principle to apply there too. The next part of time management that we're going to go over is prioritizing. And I believe I included this when we were originally talking about executive function. This is an important skill in and of itself, but it's especially important within the realm of time management. Prioritizing is basically deciding what's urgent and what's important to you. So the way I like to think about it is with the urgent and important matrix. This is an incredibly helpful diagram. If you want to reference it later on, I suggest you just Google it, because you can find a lot of these graphics online. And it basically asks the question, is this thing urgent and is it important? Urgent means that you got to do it now. It's imminent. It's coming at you. You got something due tomorrow. You just got a notification, whatever it may be. It's just happening and you have to get it done. Now, the important part is more about something that you personally value. So that would be maybe a big project you've been working on for a long time, or seeing a friend on their birthday. When you've got goals or when you have events come up in your life, you have to decide where they fall within this matrix. If you've got something that is urgent and important, that's a crisis and that has to get done first. If you got something that's not important and it's urgent, like maybe a text message from somebody you know, that's urgent, right? So that's coming in right now, but it might not be the most important thing. Down here in quadrant 4, we've got not important and not an urgent, and that's the worst of all. That's distractions. That's scrolling on your phone, and I know a lot of us have probably done that, just sat on the couch for 5 hours and been in quadrant 4. That's not where you want to be. The best place to be is in quadrant 2 in the green, and that is goals and planning. That's where things are important but not urgent. Things won't be as urgent if you effectively manage your time and get things done when you need to get them done. And you want to also make sure that you're focusing on things that are important to you. So when you're making goals, you definitely want to consult this matrix to help you decide what's important, what's urgent, and what can you leave for later. So one of the ways that you can take your goals and apply them to your daily life is by using a planner. A lot of you have probably been introduced to planners in the past. You might have been given, assignment books through your school, and you might have thought, oh, I don't need to do this. I can just remember what I have to do. You probably can't. It's always easier to remember what you have to do when you have it written down in a planner, so you can keep track of your progress, you can make a schedule, you can do a lot of things when you've got an actual planner. A planner can be digital or it can be physical, depending on what you want. Some people like that actual experience of physically writing something down. And then people like me prefer to type because our handwriting is horrible. You can buy a planner from the store or you can make your own. And what you got to do when you have a planner is make entries every day. I suggest doing this in the morning so that you're going into your day with the framework of the goals that you want to achieve. If you're in school, then homeroom would be a great time to do it. That's usually when I set up my daily planner. When you're making a planner, you want to include an ongoing list of the things that are going on in your life, like school assignments, appointments that you have, tests that are coming up, and also extracurricular things too, like maybe club meetings or athletics. So you can make this ongoing list, I suggest, in order of what is the most urgent. So at the top, I always put the things that are coming up soon, and I put them in bold. And then as you go down the list, it's things that are farther and farther away. When you have a planner, you also want to include a section of your goals for that day. That's where you're putting everything that you want to get done, all your SMART goals that you've made with the SMART framework. And then finally, this is the best part, writing down your accomplishments. When you've got a planner, always include a section to put your accomplishments. It's the best feeling when you get to cross something out, when you get to check a box. It always feels very, very satisfying. So up here, this is the planner that I use. So I've just filled in some like generic stuff to use as an example. But this is the format that I use every day during the school year. You could see up here, I've got the date, I've got my ongoing list of things, and you can separate these into categories. Remember our systems. So I've got school, I've got my, my clubs and activities, my extracurriculars, and then I've got other things too. You can see that I'm in order of urgency. Down here, we've got our goals, right? Those are our SMART goals for the day. You can see that these are specific, they're measurable, I can measure them. They are attainable, they're pretty realistic goals. None of them are too unrealistic. They're irrelevant and they are time bound. As you can see at the end, I set aside a time for all of them. And you can also make categories for your goals as well. I like to do in school and at home. And then finally at the bottom, I've got my accomplishments. I also like to use the strike through feature on Word to strike them out in my goals section because that feels very, very satisfying. And your planner doesn't have to look exactly like this. It doesn't even have to be digital if you don't want it to be. But I find that this is a very effective method for me, especially because I can just keep it open in a tab and have it on my computer all day. If you're one of those people who kind of needs a more physical planner in order to actually follow through with it, which I totally understand, I recommend getting a notebook. It doesn't even have to be a planner. It can just be a plain blank notebook, or you can get like one from the store or something. A lot of planners that you buy though will have a lot of extra stuff in it, like distracting stuff. Like it'll ask you to like do journal prompts. I don't recommend those ones. I think they can be very distracting. I think it's good to stay pretty bare bones when it comes to planners. Just add what you need so that you don't have any distractions that are taking you away from the most important part, and that is your goals. Something else that's really helpful when you're trying to manage your time and use planners and set goals is by using visual aids. I'm sure many of you have heard the expression, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. If you have something visual that you can see, That's often going to help you remember to do things and remember to set out and achieve the things that you wanted to achieve. Post-it notes are great. A lot of people will have, their laptop covered in post-it notes, and that's not great. But if you've got one post-it note hanging on your door reminding you to do something you keep forgetting to do, that can be helpful. You can color code your planner. That's a great visual aid. That's what I do. So when I have, my lists of ongoing responsibilities, I color code them based on their category. Another thing that I suggest you do is to keep your planner very accessible to you. Like I said, I bookmark mine on my browser. If you use an actual book, you can keep it on a shelf. You want to keep it very close by so that you're always able to keep track of your goals and reevaluate what you're doing. And it'll also make it a lot more likely that you'll remember to achieve the goals that you set.
Yeah, I have this funny memory from high school. I remember I would always start just killing it with my planner, highlighter, post-its, writing every single thing down. And I've kept my planners through high school. And so, even though it's more than 20 years later, I always saw that I would start kind of quitting my planner around that first week of October. I would really commit, almost overly commit to the planner experience, and then die off. And so science tells us that it usually takes about 30 days for a habit to really become automatic. And so that's what I would recommend is if you're really leaning into doing a planner this year, give yourself 30 days of practice writing it down, using color coding, and then it'll start to feel like muscle memory, but it might take that long for you to get used to the planner experience.
Exactly. Thank you for including that. A lot of people will try to, start doing the planners, or maybe it's like a New Year's resolution, and then it gets too hard and they quit. That's another reason why you might want to keep it bare bones too, especially at the beginning. Keep it nice and simple, start small so that you can start effectively managing your time over time. So now that we've gone over all these time management methods, I want to end off by emphasizing why it's important, why time management is truly your friend. You might have heard all these things we've gone over and thought that sounds like a ton of work, planning out your whole day in the morning, setting all these goals, getting a planner. But in the end, you are actually saving yourself time. And the time that it took to do your planner, that could have been time spent stressing and worrying about when you're going to do something or catching up on late homework. At the end of the day, you are saving yourself all of that time. When you manage your time, it becomes a habit eventually. As Dr. Hermitet said, it becomes a habit and your brain gets used to doing it. Your workload will not feel as daunting once you start managing your time effectively, and you're going to notice that your grades are probably going to improve and you're not going to be as behind as you might have been before. Another thing that I think is really cool about time management, especially in the context of Tourette syndrome, is that kids with TS often feel out of control, right? We can't control our tics, we can't control some of our symptoms, but when we manage our time, we gain back a slice of control in our lives, and that can be very, very powerful. So here we are on to skill number 3, and this is one of my favorites, and this is the skill of working memory. So this is kind of a big buzzword right now within, education and within psychology, but it is a really cool executive function concept that is definitely worth talking about today. So up here, you can see a diagram of yet another thing that I learned in AP psychology, and that is the Atkinson-Shiffrin model of memory. So you heard the term working memory. We got to understand a little bit about how memory works. So this is just a highly accepted model of how memory works. The first kind of memory that you have is sensory memory. So everything in your environment around you, everything that you hear, everything that you see, everything that you taste, touch, smell, your brain has an exact imprint of those senses for a very short amount of time. So everything that you see, I think it's like half a second. Everything that you hear, it's like 3 or 4 seconds that you have an exact recollection in your brain. That's sensory memory, but it fades very, very fast. If you pay attention to a specific sensory input, that goes into your short-term memory, also known as your working memory. And that's where you're holding information in your brain, right? So as you're listening to me right now, you're focusing on my voice, I hope you are, and that is going to be in your short-term working memory. And you're taking in that new information and actively using it and thinking about it. Now, over time, if you commit to memorizing this information, not even memorizing, but just, reviewing the things I've taught you today, that's going to go into long-term memory, where your memories are stored. So this is the way that memory works in this model, and we're going to be focusing on this yellow piece right here, your working memory. So the way I really like to think about working memory is that it is kind of like a notepad for your brain. It helps us hold new information and use it actively. We know that if you've got a notepad, if you're taking notes, there's only a limited capacity on a single page. You can't hold every single piece of information on one page of a notepad. And it's kind of the same thing in your short-term memory. You can't hold a ton of information that you're just learning, right? And the thing is, when you have tics and Tourette syndrome, these tics can take up space in your working memory, which makes it even harder to remember and use the things that you're learning in the moment. That's why working memory is an incredibly important executive function skill to improve upon for people with Tourette syndrome. And the other comorbid disorders can make it difficult too. So when we're working on working memory, we have to make sure that we're using the most of this mental scratch pad. And one of the best ways,
Oh, I just wanted to add, this is often why when we are making recommendations in the classroom, we recommend that individuals with TS might want to be in a distraction-free environment, because we want you to use all of that brain space to absolutely slay it on the exam and not worry so much about tick control, because tick control and slaying out on the exam often live in the same part of the brain, which is the frontal lobe. So that's a lot of times why teachers might make recommendations for a distraction-free environment. Not that you're distracting others or others are distracting you. It's that if your brain decides to tick, you can tick and kind of keep moving and using that frontal lobe to slay it.
exactly. And thank you for including that. And one of the best ways to make use of your mental scratch pad is by getting a real scratch pad or a notebook or just actually taking notes. You might have heard your teachers before tell you to take notes on a lesson, and you might think, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't feel like taking notes. But when you do it, it helps you engage with what you're learning. It helps give you more space to keep your information and eventually get it into long-term memory, because you're actively encoding the information that you're learning. And when you take physical notes, it also allows you to revisit and review them later on. So a lot of times when people take notes, I think they try to, kind of include everything the teacher is saying. Like they're scrambling to write down everything that's being said, and you do not have to do that at all. All you really got to do is emphasize the key points and ideas, and that'll help you do something called semantic encoding, which is encoding the meaning, maybe not the specifics of everything your teacher is saying, but it'll help you get the main idea that you really need to know for a test or for a quiz. So another skill that you can use in the realm of working memory is called chunking. And this is a really cool one that I loved learning about. So chunking is when you're grouping information into smaller chunks, and it kind of bypasses the limited capacity of your working memory. So you only have so much space. This is a great way to make good use of that space. The way I like to explain it is like a phone number. Phone numbers have 10 characters within them. If I were to give you an entire phone number with just those string of 10 characters, that might be very difficult to remember. But that's not how we do phone numbers. We break them into 3 groups: 111, 222, 3344. That would be a lot easier to remember than 111, 222, 3344, right? Because when you have those groups, you only have to remember each individual group. You're not trying to remember those 10 pieces. You're trying to remember the 3 groups. And you might think, okay, that's great if you're trying to memorize a bunch of numbers, but I'm probably not going to be doing that too much in real life. That's true. You can apply the principle of chunking to executive function skills as well. Like you can create a mental grouping of all the things you need for school. Instead of trying to remember maybe each of your individual supplies, you can just remember the category of supplies, like your technology or your writing utensils or your binders. That can help you chunk in those things to get organized for the day. So chunking can be a very useful strategy when you're trying to improve your working memory. Another thing that you can do within the realm of working memory is breaking it down. So instead of taking a bunch of little pieces and putting together, you're taking one big thing and breaking it into smaller, more manageable pieces. So it's kind of the opposite, but this can be very helpful if you've got a big project like a research paper or a presentation. Oftentimes, your teachers will present big projects and give you like a month to do them. And you might think it's a lot to tackle all at once. That's a lot of stuff to hold in your working memory, like all the steps that go into writing a research paper, doing your research and taking notes and drafting and editing the paper and getting it published. That's a lot of steps. That can be hard to hold in the working memory. When you break it down, you're able to pay attention to each individual task at hand. One way I like to describe breaking it down as a working memory skill is through the writing process. So the writing process is when you take an essay that you have to write or a writing piece and you break it down into 4 small steps. So the first one is planning your paper, making an outline. The second one is to write each paragraph. Then you revise each paragraph. And then finally, you ask an editor for help. So the writing process is a great example of breaking it down. So instead of trying to take on a whole essay or assignment all at once, you're putting it into smaller, more manageable pieces so that your working memory isn't too full and distracted. So I finally want to leave you off on our last message on why working memory is really important. This is a really cool executive function skill that will help you focus and learn actively in the classroom as you're learning new things. It'll help you take the things you're learning and apply them. Think maybe if you're in math class and you're learning a new way to graph a function, right? So as you're learning that, you can actively use those new skills. That's the main point of working memory. And when you improve your working memory, it'll also help you overcome distractions like tics. So you can pay attention more to the things that you want to pay attention to, such as maybe a class lesson or a conversation. The thing about working memory is that it's a little bit less concrete than the other skills. You might not fully understand it or what it is. I hope I've given you a good understanding of working memory, but it's a little hard to understand at first, but it is just as important as those skills like time management and organization of the physical space. So working memory is really instrumental in succeeding as a student and succeeding in achieving your goals. So that's all the skills that we were going to cover for today. I want to thank you guys for coming to this presentation, this webinar, and we'll get into our Q&A soon. But I just want to stress the importance of having that skilled CEO for your brain. When you harness executive function and when you dedicate yourself to learning these skills, to making them habits in your life, you will find that things that were previously incredibly challenging suddenly aren't as hard anymore. When I first decided I wanted to take control of my executive function, it was kind of daunting. It felt like a lot at first, but I started small and I kept going. And now my time management, my working memory, and my organization is much better. And I have Tourette syndrome, so I know it can be hard to manage that with TS, but I hope I'm proving to you guys that it absolutely is possible to improve these skills. And by coming here today, you've taken the first step into improving your executive function. All right, so now we're going to get into our question time. I think we had some questions in the chat.
We do, Chase. And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to share my screen really quick.
Oh, sure. Okay, I'll stop sharing mine.
Yeah, no problem.
There we go.
Let me go ahead and get that shared so y'all can see. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Chase and Dr. Armitage. Like Chase mentioned, we can go ahead and take questions. So I see a few in the chat, but also feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box on your panel. And if we don't get to your questions, we can follow up with an email for those that don't get answered today. And like on the screen, this is a great time while we're answering questions to fill out the survey using the QR code on the screen or the link in the chat. As I mentioned earlier, your feedback is very important to us so we can continue providing quality programming here at the TAA. Now, let's go ahead and get into the Q&A. I see a couple on here. The first question is, how can I access the PowerPoint afterwards? I guess I can answer that really quick. With Chase's permission, we could send them out. Would that be all right, Chase?
I grant my permission.
Okay, perfect. And I can send that to everyone when the presentation is over. We have another question, and that is, what are the best formats for note-taking?
Best formats for note-taking. I know a lot of people really like Cornell notes. That's one I've heard about time and time again, and I don't personally use them, but I think it's when you like have your essential questions on one side of the paper and you answer them on the other side of the paper. But note-taking doesn't really have to be too elaborate. I mean, when I take notes, it's just bullet points. Oh, and another thing, I was going to mention this earlier, I forgot. A lot of us might take notes in our computers now because we're Gen Z and that's what we do. So if you like to take notes using like a Word document or a Google document, You can plug them into ChatGPT. You can take your notes, plug them into ChatGPT, and ask it to make a study guide for you. It's not cheating. It's using the notes that you've already taken and just having the chat bot make them into a nice and organized format. I do it all the time. And you can ask ChatGPT to, give you a specific section on vocabulary from your notes or summaries from your notes. That's a really good method as well. So those are the two that are really jumping out to me. Dr. Hermited, if you know any more, then I guess we could share that too.
Yeah, I'm old, right? So I mean, even hearing all this stuff, I was taking notes on what you described. So I would say if you're a younger person, if you're a parent listening to this lecture, again, this can be an accommodation that you could ask from a teacher team. So a lot of times teachers will give notes where maybe just chunks of information or words are missing specifically, and then your child can fill in those notes and gaps. So that's a really great strategy for people that have a really hard time holding a lot of information to their working memory, that they're practicing the process of taking notes, listening for keywords, and plugging those keywords in the box, but not responsible for their notes in their entirety.
Right. Yep, that's definitely a good accommodation that someone could have when they're 504 and IEP. So there's plenty of ways to take notes. It's really about finding what works for you, and you can definitely experiment too if you want to find the kinds of notes that you like to take.
Awesome, thank you. That's a great suggestion, Chase, about the chat GPT. I'm a
Yep.
millennial, so I haven't really used it as much, but I love that option that you gave us. There's another question, Chase. This is for you. Was there a specific moment, experience, or memory that made you realize you really needed to commit time and practice to becoming the executive function master you are now?
Oh, that's a big compliment. Thank you. I mean, I'm definitely not a master, but I'm a work in progress. So I've gotten quite good at it over time. But specifically for me, in 8th grade, I was in this really hard class that had a lot of big assignments, tons of essays, tons of presentations. So there was like a big research paper at the end of the year. And at the beginning of the year, I realized like, oh my goodness, I need to get my S together because I was not able to manage the workload that I had. So over time, over that year, I worked with a mentor who helped me really improve my executive function skills. That's another good strategy too. Find somebody who can help you and keep you accountable. But through that class experience, I really learned, especially how to manage my time and use the best of my working memory. So that's really when it hit for me. And then carrying those skills into high school has been wonderful as well. So if you're going into high school, that could be a great time to work on your executive function skills too.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chase. Another question, how can I manage severe audible tics? I can't go a sentence without doing my tics, and it sometimes stops me from breathing for long periods of time. Nothing seems to help, but you seem to have a lot of knowledge about tics. So I think the question here is, how can I manage severe audible tics? Do you have any suggestion, Chase or Dr. Hermitet, actually?
I'm gonna pass the mic here to Dr. Hermitet.
Yeah, I think that's really fair, right? So if I can extrapolate this and just think about what that would be like during the classroom and when we're trying to focus, right? My primary recommendation would be some of those core CBIT skills, right? So identifying what are those triggering conditions that cause our vocal tic to happen and how does that affect our schoolwork? And doing that really good kind of core habit reversal. So is there a sensory sensation that's happening that tells my body that I'm about to engage in a vocal tic? When I would do CBIT in my practice, a lot of times where we would start is we would start maybe turning down the volume. So instead of our loud tick that we were doing, maybe we manipulate the volume first, and then we break that word up into meaningful units. So maybe, the word begins with sh. So maybe we say the sh, but we don't end that word, right? Or maybe the ending part is the most powerful. So we drop the sound on that, right? So again, doing those kind of core habit reversal CBIT skills will really help and support you. Another piece too, sometimes people when they have profound vocal tics, they say, "Oh, doc, like, where's the magic medicine? Do you have a magic medicine for tics?" A lot of times for those of you that have experienced medication, we're trying to get, like you said, Chase, those comorbidities in control, maybe pharmacologically, so we have more space, more bandwidth to be awesome at our executive functioning skills, then also utilize some of those therapeutic skills in the classroom or in session to help with some of those profound tics that impact our ability to be successful executive functioners or focus in the classroom.
Exactly. That definitely, those CBIT skills and using medication can be very helpful for severe audible tics. I used to have some tics that were kind of loud. Those have gone down over time. But if I were still having those tics, something I would recommend doing would be getting an accommodation that allows you to maybe test in a private room or with a private proctor, especially if it's for something like a midterm or final or an AP exam. That can help you stay more focused on your work, not worried about, what other people are doing or what they're thinking of you. So that's not necessarily a way to manage those severe tics, but it's a good way to help you get your work done regardless.
Exactly. And that kind of goes back with that original recommendation I made with that accommodation. That sometimes hearing that accommodation can feel like, wow, does that mean that my class doesn't want me in their classroom when we're doing tests? But that's just because we want to give your brain carte blanche. So if you need to do that loud vocal tic and snap right into that chemistry exam, we're giving you that ability to do that by putting you in a distraction-free environment. Great question.
That was a wonderful question. I see one more in the Q&A section, and like I said, we have some time left, so if you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel. This question is, I believe I can answer this. Just to clarify, is the sign up for Tourette Youth Ambassador open yet? Yes, they went live on August 5th, and they will be closing September 23rd. We will be working on these applications for quite some time now, and we encourage everyone who's interested in Tourette advocacy and education to apply if you're between the ages of 12 and 17.
Becoming youth ambassador, guys.
Absolutely. And I
It's a
did
great
put
program.
my email in the chat section if y'all need to reach out to me for any reason, but you can also find that information on the website. I just wanted to mention one more thing. Going back, we were talking about CBIT. I put a link in the chat also to find a provider. And if y'all need any questions about that, you can also reach out to us. All right, I don't see any more questions. I'll wait just a minute if anyone has any last minute questions.
One little tip I would give is a lot of times I like to describe the frontal lobe, like you said, Chase, is the most expensive part of the brain. So if you think about your house, your parents' house, a lot of times the most expensive thing to operate is like the air conditioner or the heater, especially if you're up north like me. And so why I use that analogy is that when our body is tired or sick or suffering or stressed, the first place that our body likes to borrow from is actually the front part of the brain. And so it's very normal for our executive functioning to be off or to feel a little bit not great at working memory or organization when we're tired, when we're sick, when we're stressed. And so a lot of times before we engage in effective behavioral intervention, I ask those questions first, and then I give my body grace. So if I'm not able to remember something during a test, or if I feel like my mood is poorly controlled, I ask myself, am I stressed? Am I tired? Did something big happen in my life? That can often be that pre-intervention before we do all of those great interventions that were talked about the whole evening today. So again, think about that frontal lobe as that air conditioner, that heater, that very, very expensive part of your brain that's hard to operate.
That is such a good way to put it. I love the metaphors that you've got for the brain, Dr. Hermitet. And another thing, just to add on to that, if you're starting to feel those things, especially if you're maybe tired and stressed at school, if you've got a big exam coming up, talk to somebody about it. There's so many people you can talk to about it. I always go to my school psychologist when I need help or to my guidance counselor. And if you get help for those kinds of problems, that can simultaneously help you improve your executive function. So if you're starting to ask yourself, am I feeling tired or sick or stressed? Getting help for those things can help you get back on track too.
Wonderful, Chase. And also one more comment here. As a retired teacher and principal living with Tourette syndrome, I want to say well done. And I must applaud you on that. Absolutely well done. And it is already 7:29, so I think we can go ahead and end here. Like I mentioned, if you'd like any hard copies of our resources, check in the chat. You can, or if you need to reach out to the Tourette Association, you can contact us by email at support@tourette.org or give us a call at 1-888-4-TOURETTE. That's 1-888-4-TOURET. Thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.